PYX 106, Capital Land's classic rock with Quinn and Cantera.
It's 1-800-LAW-1010, 1-800-LAW-1010.com. Paul Harding from Martin Harding Mazzotti on the horn.
Morning, Paul.
Good morning, guys.
So we got the Alex West verdict yesterday. Did it unfold like you thought it would?
Well, the question on the table was he going to be found guilty of second-degree manslaughter, or was it going to be sort of what we'll call the lesser offense of second-degree vehicular manslaughter or criminally negligent homicide? So, yeah, they found him guilty of the most serious crime, and I think that was the question that was sort of looming and was on the table.
And what does that mean for time, sentencing,
yeah,
that kind of thing, and his ability to get out down the road?
Sure. Yep. So the manslaughter is the most serious, 5 to 15 years, right? So the other ones were significantly less. In fact, if they had gone with, and that was the prevailing thought, that this criminally negligent homicide was 1/3 to 4 years, so significantly different. And although they sort of add up to 7.5 to 22 years, I suspect when it comes time for sentencing, and again, that's the judge's role and judge's decision, that they may just hold him accountable with the manslaughter, and the other charges that he was convicted of would run what they call concurrent, or you sort of run that time while you're running the manslaughter time.
Okay,
yeah.
so it runs at the same time.
I mean, could he do the full 22 or?
No. So let's say that the judge comes back and does say 7 1/3, which is the maximum of 22 years, right? So at the minimum, which would be the 7 1/3, he's not going to be let out the minimum. There's a death that just never happens. But then about 2/3 of the maximum, so take the 22, 2/3, put you at about 15 years. That would be the sort of the longest that he would be there, assuming there weren't other issues in prison, to get some, additional time.
Right.
So at this point, if a judge came back and gave him 5 to 15, some version of 10 years would be when Alex would then start being released on parole and supervision and things like that.
All right, so it's Attorney Paul Harding. We're talking about the Alex West verdict, which came down. Does a judge feel public pressure? Because this is a pretty high-profile case. Would a judge feel public pressure and cave to it and give him the longest sentence possible? Or they don't care?
I don't think a judge is ever going to, sort of admit that. But obviously,
now that you brought it up, Cantera, now that judge heard that, he's going to have to now throw the book at the guy.
Because, they're not, judges aren't elected, right? They're appointed, right?
Is local judges...
Yeah. Actually, the judges are elected now in other states. In Massachusetts, there's an appointment process. Here we have the election, which is always a little tricky, right? So they're out there sort of, raising money and looking for votes and all that, and then all of a sudden they got to remove themselves from that. But at this point, I think it's the type of trial where they very careful and they know it's going to be scrutinized, but ultimately, probably the judge is just going to be reading all sorts of reports about this kid and the pre-sentence investigation stuff, and then make a decision. And ultimately, the public pressure won't affect the decision, but it's certainly the judge is certainly going to do his or her homework.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
What about an appeal?
Yeah, well, the attorney, Cheryl Coleman, super competent attorney, kind of said, listen, it doesn't make sense. This alcohol piece was thrown out early. If you remember, they did the testing and they weren't able to use that, and yet there was a finding that he was impaired by alcohol, right?
Right.
So, I think there's some arguments for appeal. But again, the main thing here is the second-degree manslaughter. So even if you get some of those lesser ones thrown out,
5 to 15 at least.
Yeah, I think that's going to sort of win the day.
And then one last one for me. It's Paul Harding from Martin Harding and Mazzotti, 1-800-LAW-1010 at 1-800-LAW-1010.com. We were talking yesterday, like, they don't sequester jurors. Like,
yeah.
So they started deliberating on Friday, then they go home for the
because
weekend.
there was
and
that
come back
story,
on Monday and deliberate.
the story about the two girls last week,
a guy and the girl
who were busted for drugs again. After all this went down, kind of showing that they hadn't learned anything. And then if you're a juror and you can kind of go back home and look at the internet, even though you're told not to, you're going to do it.
This is what they're told. They said, listen, don't do any research, don't go on the case, don't talk to anybody. But someone's just going to, that's the kind of thing someone might say, holy cow, did you see that? Sure. Sequestered juries tend to be when you have just the type of, number one, maybe for their protection, but two, the media is just so, influential here that they just don't want them to get exposed to it. This is not the case where they sequester a tremendous amount of expense and inconvenience on the part of the jurors, but hopefully the jurors did not do anything independent and do any research, and that's sort of what.
Well, Cheryl Coleman made a point. Look, this is a lot of lives have been ruined here. A lot of lives have been ruined here. And if I'm Cheryl Coleman and I'm Alex West, God forbid, I don't want to be Alex West, but I'm hoping that they're sequestered. I'm hoping the jurors don't get to see stories like that, and I'm hoping I get as little time as possible, even though I effed up big time. Yeah. So, anyways.
Yeah, but that's just the way it goes, and there's always those are the risks you take. And I think that the jurors, presumably did what they were supposed to do. But sure, just the course of just waking up in the morning, you've got a child, you've got a relative, or somebody calls you, and you hear about that. Now you're supposed to kind of report that back to the judge, and I didn't hear anything about that. And so I think that at this point, probably a moot point.
We're replacing Log Bay Day with something. We haven't come up with it yet, but I'm thinking of a fully clothed chess tournament.
Quinn wants to take that day back.
Probably get less attendance, but it's a good,
Hey, less attendance. You don't know that yet, Paul.
Well, I don't know that. You're right.
Well, listen, we appreciate all the information this morning, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Paul.
We appreciate it.
Okay, guys. Talk soon.
There you go. Paul Harding from Martin Harding Mazzotti, 1-800-LAW-1010, 1-800-LAW-1010.com.
Quinn and Cantera, mornings on PYX 106.